Hi, seniors. I want to talk a little bit about typography and why it's important. So first, type obviously stems from handwriting. In the same way, people have bad handwriting, and you'd argue that it doesn't reflect very well on you if you have bad handwriting that's hard to read. It's very similar with digital type. So type started from the letterpress. A bit of history. The first book was the Bible, and it was actually individual letters. You can kind of see how they're sort of put together here, and they were made out of metal, and they would be aligned one by one, and then you would press a roll paper through it, and that's how you would create your letters on the page. And this was actually the first, as it were, font. This was from the Gutenberg press, and you can kind of see how there's edges on the side of the letters, and these edges are where the ink used to leak, because the way it would work, you'd have these metal um, letters that were typeset, and then you would roll ink on top of them, and then you would roll the paper through it, and that's how you get these letters. Um, and since then, obviously, type has evolved quite a bit. Here again, we might as well nerd out a little bit with some parts of a letter. This is not stuff you'll probably ever need to know, but it's interesting. At least I think it is. So we have the X height. X height is your height of your letter as you're on the page. So you'll see that it's basically a lowercase letter. So, and then you have your ascender, which is what extends from the top of your X height. So, for example, often the ascender, which extends on your lowercase letters, will be the same as the cap height, which is now your capital letters. And why this is important is because when you design fonts, you obviously don't want the text to run into each other. You want to have nice spacing between the different lines, which is called leading, which we'll talk about later. So that's why it's important. Believe it or not, people go to university for 4 years to study typography. So it is an art, and you obviously need. And then descenders, sorry, are the letters that extend or rather go down from the X height. And again, this is you can see the Y here, or in this case, the Q. Okay, so I mentioned it briefly, but leading is the space between the lines. So, like in Word or a program you might use, you might double space or triple space, hopefully not. Regular leading is considered, is single space, but actually, um, usually, like in magazines or in a resume or something, you'll think of 1.5 spacing as sort of a visually nice leading to consider. Tracking is the space between the letters. So you can see that here we're increasing the tracking space. And what that means, there's more space between the T and the R. That's the tracking. And then there's something called kerning, which is actually very similar to tracking, but it's now not the whole word. You can see here there's increasing the space between T and R and A and C and K. If we were kerning, it would be increasing the space just between the T and the R. Okay, moving on. This is important stuff. So here we have serif fonts. What's a serif? A serif are these funny looking things that you see on the side of the letters. So you have the T over here, and then you have this sort of, what would you call that? A little flag or something that sort of sticks out of the edges of the T here, or you have it on the top of the F or on the R. And these are called serifs. And actually what research has shown is that serifs help the reader's eye go across the page. That's why when you look at a book, for example, your English books or any sort of book that you might read, it's always going to be in a serif font, because I'm sure a lot of you have come across a situation where you're sort of reading on you're reading a book, and then suddenly you don't remember what line you were on, and your sort of eye skips, and you're trying to find your place again. So serifs prevent that from happening, or at least help your eye stay focused on that line. So it's used for body text. These are examples, of serif font. We have Adobe Jensen, Baskerville. This is, I wouldn't say you want to use this for your body text, but you can see that it's called a modern serif, and it's also got these things that stick out from the letters. Sans serif, sans is Latin for without, and it literally means without serif. So here you have a font. You'll see it does not have like the R over here doesn't have the little whatever you want to call them, the serifs sticking out. Same with the T. So it's just basically they chopped off the serifs. Generally, they're considered modern fonts. You'll have them for titles, or for like you'll notice like companies that want to look modern, like tech companies, Apple, those sort of companies, they'll always use sort of sans serif fonts. These are examples of sans serif fonts, and you'll see that this is now going quite deep into it. But the type designers will argue that this is like Gill Sans is a humanist sans serif font, so it actually looks a little bit friendlier than some other sans serif fonts. So even within sans serif fonts, you have different types of families. Script fonts. A script is literally based off somebody's script, so it's basically based off somebody's handwriting. So we have script fonts called, like there's a font called Shakespeare, and that would be based on Shakespeare's handwriting. I used to do a project with kids where they would design their own font, and a lot of kids chose to design it off their own handwriting. So you would literally, write something, and every letter would be their own font. So you could, submit an essay for some subject, typed out, but it would be in your handwriting. At the horror of the teacher, I'm sure. Next, we have display fonts, and display fonts again are used for display. So you might have it on a title of a magazine or like a logo or something, and you can imagine how hard it would be to read a book in a display font. So there, it should be used selectively and only for specific purposes. So those are the sort of the four I would say types of fonts. Moving on within a font, so this is a sans serif font, so you'll see it's a very modern font, Myriad. It's actually the default Illustrator font, and the serifs have been chopped off, as you can tell, so it's a sans serif font. But there's a font family, so these are all different types of Myriad. So yeah, like a family of fonts. So you can see that they all look the same, but they have a very different look. You have your Myriad Bold, and then you have your light one, you have italic, and they can be used for different purposes, but they all have the same look and feel. So quickly, just the recap. So we have name the type of font. First one, we have Helvetica. It's a very famous sans serif font. It was designed in Switzerland. It's used in a lot of magazines. There's a lot of I think it's actually the Swissair logo is used in Helvetica, but I think it used to be one of the default ones on Microsoft Word. Then we have Times New Roman, a very famous, this is a very famous serif font. You can see the serifs on the edges here. It's actually based off I think it's a Times newspaper, but it's based off journalism. So it was a font designed by a designer for reading body text. Bauhaus. This is a famous. This is now a display font. Again, you would use it maybe for a logo or for a title in a magazine, but you would never want to see a lot of text in this font. It'd be hard to read. And then Bradley Hand is based off somebody's handwriting, so it's a script font. Okay, again, these are all different type of fonts, and I guess the idea behind this slide would be just to show you some exercise you could do, but where there's 6 different fonts here, and I have 6 different what would you call these feelings or styles. So informal, trendy, modern, loud, serious, and elegant. And I guess the exercise would be looking at this text over here. Which of these descriptors would you assign to this line? So you take a couple of seconds just to have a look at it. And when I do this exercise in class, it's quite amazing to see how much people agree. And generally, I'm trying to see if I can remember this. So the first one, how does this make you feel? This is a very bold font. I would say it's definitely a loud font. How does this make you feel? Definitely not formal. Kind of feels informal. Yeah, it's correct. Informal. This makes you feel. This is a serif font. So I don't know. I personally would say this is a rather serious font. You might have this on a newspaper or maybe a resume. This makes you feel. This is something where it's probably the most discrepancy. But I put in there because I see this as trendy. But again, trends change. But yeah, it's and then how does this make? The number 5 would be maybe I think this was an elegant font. People you seem to switch between these 2, 4, and 5, between trendy and elegant. And then the last one is this is a very modern font. Again, this is Helvetica that I used again. Okay, so again, just I think it's important. Every font has its own style. Every font has its own feeling to it. So please use them. Use them with that in mind. So just quick. So now, never do this. So yeah, having mentioned, sort of talked about fonts and the fact that they got different styles. This is, I mean, this is kind of cliche, talking about Comic Sans, but never use this font. It's bad. It's unless you're an elementary school teacher, this really shouldn't feature ever in your work, or in an email or in a body or anything like that. Just doesn't look very professional. Never do this. I mean, people do this and they sort of say, but I mean, there's a reason why even if you look at a book cover and a book on a shelf, they're not going downwards. I mean, they have the title written on the side, but it's hard to read. It doesn't look good. The spacing's all wrong. Just don't do this. Never do this. I mean, this just gives me, this gives me migraines. Just, you can see, I don't know if you'd even notice it, but it's all stretched out. Just don't do that. The same way you wouldn't want, your picture to look like that. Just don't do that to a font either. Yeah, that's just, don't do that. Okay, moving on. So here, yeah, this is, if I were looking at a resume and I saw something like this, I would, throw it in the bin right away. Yeah, don't mix fonts. You definitely don't want to mix. I mean, even I would say don't even mix two fonts. Definitely not three fonts, and definitely not different type of fonts. So here we have a sans serif, a serif, and a script font. This happens to be Comic Sans. Yeah, don't ever do this, please. Okay, obviously, any of you who have studied color theory or art students, don't ever do this. Don't, put contrasting colors like this. This gives you a headache just looking at it. But generally, obviously, you know, uh, be aware of what colors you're going to put on top of each other. You tend to see this a lot in web design, and that's, it's as applicable on a paper as it is on screen. To be cognizant of different color combinations. Same here, I would say don't mix your colors together. You can have different levels. You can have a black and a gray, but don't do something like this. It just doesn't look very professional. I would say something like this would be okay. I think that looks quite good. I'm not necessarily sure I would do a sans serif, an italic here, but this is all one font. It's all Helvetica, but I'm just within the same family. So this is Helvetica Bold, this would be regular Helvetica, and this is Helvetica Italic. That looks professional and clean. And again, you can, if you wanted to do like a different, gradient of it, I think that still looks quite nice. So I'm going to end this now. If you haven't switched off yet, hope you learned something. But yeah, so this you can print this out, hang it on top of your bed if you ever want to, refer back to typography and fonts and why it's important. Thank you very much, and yeah.